The cruel billionaire who found his deepest pain in the heart of a simple woman, from the dazzling penthouse suites of Manhattan to the humble outskirts of a quiet countryside. This is a story of two hearts destined to collide. Alexander Harrington. A ruthless billionaire known for his cold-blooded business tactics, believes the world and everyone in it can be bought at any price. Maria Alvarez. A small-town woman brimming with quiet strength, has known hardship and heartbreak, yet still carries hope in her heart. When their worlds converge in a swirl of ambition and raw emotion, neither of them is prepared for how drastically their lives will change. Brace yourself. Betrayal, redemption, and a love no one expected await. Alexander Harrington was not just wealthy, he was legendary. Born into modest means in London, he transformed an inheritance of a run-down bookstore into a behemoth multinational conglomerate known as Harrington Holdings. By 35, he had been featured on the cover of Forbes. Multiple times, won a high-stakes business duel against technology mogul Elon Musk in a bidding war for a renewable energy startup, and was known among high society as the man who never lost. In private, some called him ice-blooded Alexander. To his face they remained silent, entranced by his effortless confidence and unlimited resources. High atop Harrington Tower, a newly constructed architectural masterpiece in the heart of Manhattan, Alexander's office commanded sweeping views of the city he controlled. Everything from that vantage point looked small. The financial district, the flashes of yellow taxis, and the bustling crowds. No one could see the man who stood behind the polished windows, equally unreachable and fortified by his iron will. Within these marble corridors, deals were made and empires expanded. The day Alexander was meant to finalize his biggest merger, yet an acquisition of a European automotive giant. His phone buzzed with a personal call he had not expected. A quiet voice on the other end informed him that his old friend and legal advisor, Jennifer Moretti, had died in a car accident in a small town upstate. Despite his ruthless reputation, Alexander felt a dull pang in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. Jennifer had been one of the few people who had known him before his icy transformation, back when his heart was capable of gentler emotions. Still, Alexander was not one to show vulnerability. He swiftly pushed aside his grief and continued with the day's schedule. But as he settled back into the plush leather chair, he found himself gazing at a photograph on his desk, a rare personal artifact. It was an old snapshot from a charity gala at which Jennifer had convinced him to speak about philanthropic efforts. Standing next to him was a bright-eyed young woman named Maria Alvarez, a volunteer teacher whose community center the Harrington Foundation had supported for a brief time. He remembered the flush of pink on her cheeks as she'd thanked him for his donation. She had looked at him as though he were some hero, even though he had simply signed a check for a tax break. For reasons he could not explain, his eyes lingered on Maria's face in the photo. He remembered Jennifer's teasing afterward. "She has a good heart," Jennifer had said. "You need someone like that in your life." He had laughed it off, shrugging away the notion that he could ever be truly close to anyone. With a deep exhale, Alexander set the photo down, the memory already threatening to distract him from the strategy meeting, starting in mere minutes. A deep scowl settled over his features as he turned to the window. The city glimmered under the midday sun, an empire he ruled by day and overshadowed by night. He glanced at the phone again, his expression shuttered. "What do I care if it's all fleeting?" he murmured to himself, though something in his voice trembled ever so slightly. Then, as if caught in a moment of self-awareness, his jaw tightened, and he rose to stride confidently into the next conference room. He refused to let sentiment disrupt the carefully curated empire he had built. He promised himself it would be the last time he'd think of Jennifer or the small-town funeral. Unfortunately for him, that promise wouldn't last long. 2 weeks later, Alexander found himself driving through winding roads and autumn-kissed hills in upstate New York. He rarely ventured outside Manhattan for personal reasons, but a part of him felt an odd obligation to pay his respects to Jennifer. She had been more than just his lawyer. She had been a friend who stood by him when no one else would back when he was still constructing the early scaffolding of Harrington Holdings. As Alexander arrived at the modest church, the funeral procession was already underway. Clutching a single white rose, he slipped into a back pew. The service was brief yet emotional, with several people stepping up to share memories of Jennifer's generosity and kindness. Alexander did not speak. Words had never come easily to him outside of boardrooms. But near the end of the service, his eyes met someone he recognized immediately. Maria Alvarez, the woman from the old photograph. Maria stood near the altar, wearing a simple black dress. When she spoke, her voice trembled, but did not falter. She recounted how Jennifer had offered free legal assistance to the community center, how her generosity had saved them from shutting down. She even mentioned Alexander's donation, crediting Harrington Holdings for bridging the gap in their finances. Her gratitude was genuine, untainted by greed or self-interest. Alexander felt an unfamiliar warmth stirring in his chest. When the service concluded, mourners filed out of the church. Alexander followed from a distance, not quite ready to confront Maria or anyone else. But fate intervened. Maria recognized him, her eyes widening in surprise. She approached, offering a small, hesitant smile. "Mr. Harrington," she said quietly, as if uncertain whether to use his first name. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I pay my debts," he replied curtly, slipping into the aloof persona that had shielded him for years. Maria's face flickered with a mix of curiosity and caution at his bluntness. She nodded. "Jennifer would have appreciated it. She spoke fondly of you." Her gaze drifted downward. "I'm sorry for your loss." Alexander found himself unsure of what to do with that sympathy. Most people in his world were either frightened of him or desperate to please him. Compassion was not something he encountered often. He gave a short nod. She was a friend, he managed. Maria tried to smile again, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "We're holding a small memorial gathering at the community center tonight. You're welcome to join us if you'd like. It's, not grand. But we'll share stories about Jennifer. Maybe it'll help." Alexander's inclination was to say no. He had an important meeting the following morning back in the city. Attending a simple memorial in a modest town hall was not on his itinerary, yet something, perhaps guilt, perhaps curiosity, held him back from declining outright. "I'll think about it," he said tersely, turning on his heel before she could respond. He tried to convince himself that he had no intention of going, that he would drive back to Manhattan and immerse himself in the final negotiations of the massive European merger. But as he left the churchyard, passing by small groups of mourners, huddled under the ancient oak trees, he couldn't shake the sight of Maria's tear-laced gratitude, and for the briefest second, he recalled a time long ago when he had not yet learned how to be cruel, when he had simply been Alexander, a young man with dreams that didn't revolve solely around money. Later that evening, with dusk settling over the rolling hills, Alexander found himself driving toward the community center. He told himself it would only be for a moment, to make a gesture and then leave. Little did he know this small act would be the thread that began to unravel the carefully stitched armor around his heart. The old community center was a far cry from the modern steel and glass structures Alexander had grown accustomed to in the city. Still, the warmth that enveloped him as he stepped through the doors felt strangely comforting. He observed the faded posters on the corkboard, the mismatched chairs, and the handmade signs congratulating local students on their achievements. A small crowd had gathered in a makeshift hall lit by overhead fluorescent lights. The air was thick with emotion and the scent of homemade casseroles. At the front was a table draped in white cloth displaying photographs of Jennifer. People milled around, exchanging memories in hushed tones. Maria noticed Alexander the moment he entered. She offered a polite nod, inviting him over. He wandered toward her, actly aware of how out of place he felt. Dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than the entire annual budget of the center, he stuck out like a diamond in the rough. "Thank you for coming," Maria said softly, gesturing for him to join a small circle of people sharing their recollections of Jennifer. One by one, they described her kindness, her readiness to offer legal support whenever needed, and her dream to expand the center to host after-school programs for underprivileged kids. The stories were earnest and heartfelt, and Alexander began to see a dimension of Jennifer's life he never truly knew. Soon the conversation shifted to the future of the center. A lanky man named Gabriel, who seemed to manage the place, sighed heavily. "We're still behind on funding. Jennifer was working on grants and donations. Now with her gone, I'm not sure we can keep everything going." Maria's eyes flicked to Alexander. He detected a flicker of something in her gaze. Hope, perhaps, or maybe apprehension. She said nothing, but Alexander could read the unspoken plea. Normally, philanthropic appeals either infuriated him or bored him, but for once he found himself unwilling to dismiss the subject. He cleared his throat. "Have you applied for any new grants?" Government or private? Gabriel's face lit up. "We tried, but we haven't heard back. Jennifer said she had an appointment with some donors in the city, but that was before." He trailed off, the unspoken tragedy hanging in the air. Alexander's mind worked quickly, calculating the minimal cost it would take to keep this center afloat. A drop in the ocean for a man of his means. He almost offered to write a check right then and there, but stopped himself. He was not a man who acted on whims, not anymore. "I can take a look at the proposals," he said, fighting to keep his tone even. "I can offer advice, maybe connect you with some people I know." A wave of gratitude washed over Gabriel's face. "That'd be incredible, Mr. Harrington. Even any guidance you can provide would be a godsend." Maria's eyes glimmered with unshed tears, and she pressed her lips together, as if afraid to say something that might shatter the moment. Alexander found himself meeting her gaze and felt a strange tug in his chest. Her expression was so raw, so open, it nearly humbled him. In his world, everything had a price. Gratitude was nothing more than a fleeting courtesy. But here it felt like something entirely different, something that carried real weight. He shook the feeling away and glanced around the room. People were approaching him now, thanking him for just considering the idea of helping. He felt awkward, as if he were an imposter in a place that valued compassion more than capital. Before he could leave, Maria gently touched his arm. "Would you like to see the children's corner before you go?" she asked with a soft, almost shy smile. "Jennifer helped us redesign it last year." Alexander hesitated. His phone vibrated in his pocket, likely a reminder of some pending business. He glanced at the screen and saw an email from a partner in Berlin about tomorrow's merger. Normally he would have excused himself, but tonight he slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Lead the way," he said. And in that moment, a crack appeared in the armor he had built around himself. He just wasn't aware of it yet. Maria walked Alexander down a narrow hallway to a bright mural-covered room. Cartoon animals, alphabet letters and numbers, danced along the walls in lively shades of green, yellow, and blue. The smell of crayons and old paint lingered in the air. Colorful rugs were scattered across the floor, dotted with small chairs and tables where children presumably gathered to read and draw. "This is where the after-school program runs, Maria said, gesturing around the room. "Jennifer spent a lot of time here, helping us get new books, stationery, and sometimes even tutors for the kids." Alexander scanned the shelves of well-worn children's books and the stacks of art supplies. The entire room looked like it had been loved to near destruction. Edges of tables where chipped paint was peeling in corners, and several of the books had taped-up spines. He could practically hear an accountant's voice in his head, listing all the improvements that needed funding. It wouldn't cost him much, relatively speaking, to make this a world-class facility. Maria watched him closely, as if trying to gauge his reactions. Her eyes were filled with something he recognized as compassion. It startled him how genuine it felt. "I volunteer here 3 times a week," she said. "The kids come from tough backgrounds, many of them. This center, it's a haven for them." Alexander nodded. In his corporate dealings, he had met countless philanthropists who bragged about the millions they donated, usually for tax breaks or publicity. But seeing Maria and the others here put a different spin on it. They were not chasing headlines or social media clout. They just wanted to help day in and day out. He ran a hand along the back of a small chair, thinking about how easily he had once dismissed these endeavors. In fact, if not for Jennifer, he would have sold off the small philanthropic arm of his corporation years ago. He had seen it as another business angle, another chance to build connections. Now he felt almost ashamed. "Thank you for showing me," he said awkwardly. He wasn't used to thanking people unless it was to close a deal. But he could see Maria was genuinely proud of this place. She smiled. "I know it might not look like much, but it means everything to the children." Her gaze followed his to the battered stacks of books. "We do our best." They stood in silence for a moment. Alexander's thoughts wandered to how Jennifer had always pushed him to see beyond profit margins. "You can do more, Alexander," she'd say, her eyes shining with conviction. "You have the power and the responsibility to make a real difference." Back then he had brushed it off, convinced that the only difference he needed to make was in his net worth. But now, standing in this run-down yet lovingly preserved space, he could almost feel Jennifer's presence nudging him to open his eyes. Maria glanced at her watch. "I should head back to the main hall. They might need my help cleaning up. Are you heading back to the city tonight?" He hesitated. Yes, that had been the plan. He had a crucial video conference at 8 in the morning, but his mind was torn. He realized he was in a place that reminded him just a little of who he used to be, someone who had once believed he could do good long before the world had taught him to be cruel. "I suppose I could stay a bit longer," he said, surprising even himself. "But I can't stay too late." Maria's relief was palpable. "We're having coffee and sandwiches in the main hall. Feel free to join if you want. If not, I understand. It's been a long day." Alexander followed her back, conscious of how calm he felt compared to the buzz of his corporate life. He mingled briefly, or more accurately, allowed people to gather around him. He offered professional advice, calmly noting the resources that could help. He glanced at Maria from time to time, watching how effortlessly she moved among the crowd, comforting a grieving friend one moment, and making a child laugh the next. When at last he excused himself to leave, the clock on the wall read nearly 10 p.m. As he stepped outside, a crisp breeze rustled the oak trees that lined the street. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. It had been years since he felt any sense of fulfillment from something other than a financial victory. Yet here he was, feeling oddly at peace in a small town he had never thought he'd step foot in again. He climbed into his sleek black sedan. Driving away, he glanced in the rearview mirror at the faint glow of the community center's lights. Something tugged at him, a small ember of warmth in a heart that had long remained frigid. For the first time in a very long time, Alexander Harrington felt human. Alexander returned to Manhattan with a mind full of conflicting emotions. He steeled himself for the relentless demands of corporate life as he walked into Harrington Tower early the next morning. Any lingering warmth from the memorial was quickly overshadowed by the chaos swirling around the merger negotiations. His executive team was in a flurry, determined to finalize the acquisition of the European automotive titan von Richter Motors. Seated at the head of the long, polished conference table, Alexander exuded his usual commanding presence. However, his mind wandered, albeit briefly, to the community center he had just visited. He made a mental note to have someone from his philanthropic division look into the proposals Gabriel had mentioned. He told himself it was merely a favor in memory of Jennifer. That excuse kept him from fully reckoning with the unfamiliar pang of empathy stirring inside him. It was in the midst of these business talks that Alexander received an urgent message from his chief financial officer, Fiona Sutherland. The CFO's expression was grave as she slipped a thin folder into his hands. "This can't wait," she murmured quietly. "We've discovered some irregularities in the subsidiary accounts." Alexander's eyes narrowed. He dismissed the rest of the team, instructing them to take a brief recess. Once they were gone, he opened the folder. The numbers told a chilling story. Multi-million-dollar transactions, funneling through shell companies, inflated invoices, and suspicious write-offs that didn't add up. Most disturbing of all was the connection to a name he knew well. Martin Cole, an influential board member of Harrington Holdings. Someone he had trusted. "Is this real?" Alexander asked, his voice taut with controlled fury. Fiona nodded. "We have reason to believe Mr. Cole has been siphoning funds, disguising them in different subsidiaries. It's sophisticated, but there's enough evidence to pursue a formal investigation." Alexander's stomach churned. This was a betrayal that cut deep. Martin Cole was not just a colleague. He had played a pivotal role in early expansions, bringing valuable connections and resources. He had witnessed Alexander's rise, even offered moral support on rare occasions. But greed knows no loyalty. How long, Alexander asked, flipping through more pages. "Months, maybe even a year," Fiona replied. "And it seems he's using some of those funds to gain leverage in other corporations, possibly to orchestrate a hostile takeover from within." A dark, simmering rage built inside Alexander. No one stole from him. No one manipulated him without facing dire consequences. He was famed for his brutal business approach, and Martin would soon learn the full force of that reputation. The CFO hesitated before speaking again. "I'm not sure if this affects the current merger, but it could undermine our financial health and credibility if news breaks out. Investors might lose confidence. We must be discreet but decisive." Alexander stood, the folder in hand, posture rigid with anger. Start the internal investigation immediately. Quietly gather as much evidence as possible. I want every last detail pinned down before I confront him. Fiona nodded, her face serious. Will do, sir. When she left, Alexander walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The panoramic view of the city lay before him like a giant board game, one he typically played with unshakable skill. But the swirling events of the funeral, the subsequent visit to the community center, and now this betrayal by a trusted associate, made him feel strangely off balance. A memory flashed Maria's kind eyes, the children's corner, the sense of purpose that flickered in him for just an instant. He was reminded of how fleeting trust could be, how easily illusions shattered. With his fists clenched, Alexander stared down at the city that had once seemed so small from his towering vantage point. He had built his empire on the bedrock of ambition, a fortress of wealth. Yet he realized in that moment that something intangible was missing. Betrayal had become a constant companion in his world, overshadowing everything. People like Maria showed him that life could be different. Yet here he was, consumed by business wars yet again. He made a vow to himself once he dealt with Martin Cole, he would settle his debt to Jennifer's memory. Whether that meant funding the community center or personally supporting Maria's cause, he would do it. It would be a testament to his loyalty to the friend he had lost, and maybe, just maybe, a small step toward the man he had once hoped to be. 2 weeks passed in a blur of hushed investigations, secretive account audits, and a mounting tension that crackled through the corridors of Harrington Holdings. Alexander had tasked his most discreet and efficient team members with collecting evidence against Martin Cole. Every day, new findings emerged, painting a grim portrait of Cole's betrayal. Amidst this turmoil, something persisted in tugging at Alexander, an unrelenting memory of the warmth he had felt at the community center. Late one evening, when the city lights glowed through the panoramic windows of his office, he finally acted. He dialed the number Maria had scribbled on a piece of paper back at the memorial, a direct line to the community center. She answered on the third ring, her voice a mixture of fatigue and surprise. "Hello, Maria. It's Alexander Harrington." She paused for a moment. "Oh, Mr. Harrington, hi. I wasn't expecting to hear from you." He realized he had never told her to call him by his first name. He also realized he wanted her to. Pushing aside the thought, he spoke in a measured tone. "I remembered you mentioned needing help with your proposals. I have some time now." He heard the rustle of papers on her end, followed by a muffled laugh. "Sure, let me just find them. But are you sure this is a good time? It's quite late." Alexander glanced at the clock on his desk, which read 10:23 p.m. "Time is relative," he replied tersely. "I'd like to discuss them." During their conversation, Maria walked him through the center's budget, the grants they had applied for, and the shortfall they faced. She was remarkably organized, her passion evident in every explanation. Alexander listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. The corporate shark in him recognized how easy it would be to fix these financial gaps. Yet he also recognized the intangible value of what Maria and her colleagues were doing, forging a sense of belonging, community, and hope. "You've done your homework," Alexander remarked at one point, impressed by her thoroughness. "I'll have my team review this. I can't guarantee an immediate solution, but I can expedite introductions to a few philanthropic funds." Maria exhaled in relief. "That would be incredible. Thank you." They paused. Alexander could hear her breathing on the line, soft and tentative. He wondered if she hesitated to say something more. Then she spoke. "How are you?" After Jennifer's funeral and everything, I mean. You mentioned she was a close friend. Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. He wasn't used to people asking about his well-being without an ulterior motive. I'm fine, he said automatically. Right, she said, her tone gentle, as if recognizing a wall. Well, I'm here if you ever need to talk about her. I know it might sound silly, but she mattered to a lot of us. Sometimes sharing helps. Alexander's chest constricted. No one had offered him such a simple gesture of kindness in years. Thank you, he replied softly, surprising himself with the sincerity of his own voice. The call ended soon after, but Alexander found himself lingering at his office desk long after. He stared at the city skyline. A storm brewed inside him, a mix of anger at Martin's treachery and a budding sense of gratitude toward Maria's unguarded compassion. The next morning, he took action. He requested his driver and headed back upstate unannounced. Arriving unceremoniously at the community center, he found Maria rummaging through boxes of donated items. She nearly dropped a stack of books when she saw him walk in, dressed in a sharp navy suit. "Mr. Harrington," she exclaimed, eyes wide. "I didn't know you were coming." "I didn't either," he admitted. "But I wanted to see the place again and discuss some of the next steps for funding." She nodded enthusiastically, pushing aside the boxes. "I'm glad. We can talk in the office," she said, leading him to a small, cluttered room that served as the administrative hub. They spent the next hour reviewing budgets and drafts of donation pitches. As they worked, Alexander couldn't help but notice the everyday hustle around them. Volunteers bustled, children laughed in distant hallways, and staff members greeted each other with genuine warmth. At one point, a little boy with a stained t-shirt peeked into the office to shyly ask Maria for help tying his shoelaces. She obliged with a patient smile. Alexander watched, slightly taken aback by how natural and caring she was with the child. She ruffled the boy's hair, and he giggled before scampering back into the corridor. In that unguarded moment, Maria looked up at Alexander. Her cheeks colored as if she felt self-conscious about this small act of kindness. But Alexander simply cleared his throat. "You're good with him," he said, an odd mixture of admiration and unfamiliar envy creeping into his voice. She looked down. "I just like being around them. They remind me that no matter how hard life can get, there's always joy to be found in simple things." He said nothing, but a part of him understood. For years he had sought joy in achievement and power, forgetting the simple moments of connection that he used to crave. Something about Maria's presence awakened that old desire, an echo of the man he used to be before life taught him to become untouchable. He caught himself staring at Maria's warm brown eyes. Something swelled in his chest, something he didn't quite have a name for yet. Maybe it was longing, maybe it was regret, or maybe it was the first faint stirrings of a hope that threatened to unravel the careful life he had built. Over the following weeks, Alexander began to juggle two worlds. By day, he was the decisive mogul laying traps for Martin Cole and ensuring the von Richter Motors merger proceeded smoothly. By night, or on occasional weekends, he found himself driving upstate, often under the guise of checking on philanthropic progress. Yet each visit to the community center became more personal. He and Maria started to talk beyond budgets and proposals. She asked him once in a moment of quiet lull, "How did you become so successful so quickly?" It wasn't adoration in her voice. It was genuine curiosity. "By never trusting anyone Alexander answered bluntly. He realized too late how cynical it sounded. Maria's lips parted in surprise, but she didn't lecture him. She simply listened, as though she sensed a deeper wound beneath those words. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Alexander arrived to find the center buzzing with activity. A charity drive was underway in the parking lot, filled with booze, bake sales, and families milling about. The sight startled him. He wasn't used to unplanned crowds. Yet Maria welcomed him warmly, introducing him to volunteers, local officials, and some of the children who benefited from the center's programs. "You're like a celebrity around here," she teased, noticing how people pointed and whispered. "But they're too shy to approach." Alexander forced a tight smile. He was used to being recognized, but typically in business circles or high society events. This was different. People here seemed to regard him with a mix of awe and gratefulness. It made him uncomfortable in a strangely humbling way. As the day wore on, Alexander found himself helping out at a booth, collecting small donations. This was far from his usual environment of million-dollar checks and high-stakes deals. Yet for the first time in a long while, he felt more at ease than he ever did in the boardroom. When the charity drive wrapped up, Maria suggested a walk through the quaint downtown area. They strolled past cozy cafes, boutique shops, and an old cinema. The air carried the scent of freshly baked bread from a local bakery. Maria bought a loaf and offered him a piece. He nearly declined out of habit, but ended up accepting. The simple act of breaking bread together under the golden afternoon light felt more comforting than any lavish business dinner he had ever attended. But just as a new warmth blossomed between them, the weight of Alexander's past reasserted itself. They stopped by a bench near a small fountain. The water gurgled softly, reflecting the sun's waning rays. Maria sat folding her hands in her lap. She glanced at Alexander, as if debating whether to speak. When she finally did, her voice was soft. "You said you don't trust people. And I can sense it. There's a wall around you. I'm not prying, but I wanted you to know that you can trust me if you ever need someone to talk to." He let out a mirthless laugh. "I appreciate the sentiment," he said. "But trust is complicated in my world." Her brow furrowed. "I understand. But sometimes the only way to heal is to let someone in." A memory flashed across Alexander's mind, the day he had taken a leap of faith on a business partner he considered a friend only to be swindled. He remembered how that betrayal had hardened him. But there was more, something far more personal. An old heartbreak he never spoke of. She had been his fiancée once, a woman named Claire. He had believed in love back then, had dreamed of a life beyond deals and fortunes. But she'd left him on the night he needed her most, lured by the promise of an easier life with another man. The heartbreak had been more devastating than any business loss, shaping him into the cold, unyielding man he had become. He inhaled sharply, shaking off the memory. "I learned the hard way that trust is a weakness people exploit," he said at last. Maria reached out and gently touched his hand. The contact was a lightning bolt, sending warmth up his arm. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. "But not everyone is like that. Look around you. These people are genuine, and they don't want anything from you except maybe your help, which you're already giving." His eyes swept the small town square, watching families pack up from the charity event. The laughter of children echoed in the air. She was right. These were not the cutthroat circles he'd grown used to. But letting down his guard felt like stepping into quicksand. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Fiona. Urgent was all it read. Duty beckoned. He stood, stepping away from Maria's touch. "I have to go," he said stiffly, as if snapping back into the role of the ruthless billionaire. She nodded, her expression tinged with disappointment. "All right. Just be careful, Alexander." He offered a curt nod, turning on his heel. As he walked away, he felt her eyes on his back. The warmth of her touch lingered, battling the chill of his old wounds and present betrayals. It was a war inside him, one he wasn't sure he was ready to fight. Alexander rushed back to Manhattan with grim determination. He found Fiona waiting in his office, a stack of documents spread across the mahogany desk. Her face was pale, her expression urgent. "What's happened?" He demanded, his voice taut with tension. She handed him a dossier. "We've uncovered the last pieces of evidence. Martin Cole has been not only siphoning funds, but also feeding classified corporate information to a rival group. If the European merger goes through, he plans to orchestrate a scandal that could crash our stock and force you out as CEO." Alexander's eyes darkened. "He wants a takeover," he snarled, slamming the dossier on the desk. "That snake." Fiona nodded. "We also have reason to believe he's close to sealing a deal with a major investor willing to back him. It's a matter of time before he makes his move." Alexander took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "We need to act. Prepare to call an emergency board meeting. Only the members we trust. We'll confront Martin with irrefutable proof." Fiona nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." The next morning, an urgent summons was sent to the board, citing matters of critical importance. The meeting convened in a private conference room on the top floor. Martin Cole sauntered in, feigning innocence, wearing a polished smile as he greeted his fellow board members. Alexander entered last, cold fury, emanating from every step. The atmosphere was electric tension so thick it made the air crackle. He wasted no time. "I've gathered you all here to address an imminent threat to Harrington Holdings," he said, shooting Martin a piercing glare. "I have evidence of large-scale embezzlement and corporate espionage perpetrated by a trusted member of this board." A gasp rippled through the room. Martin's face twitched imperceptibly, but he maintained a facade of confusion. "What is this about, Alexander?" Alexander tossed the dossier onto the table pages, spilling out with damning evidence. "Care to explain Martin bank statements? Shell Company's private communications with a rival conglomerate. All pointing to you." Martin's eyes flicked nervously over the documents, but he attempted a confident scoff. "This is preposterous. Are you really going to take random files and accuse me of wrongdoing?" Fiona stepped forward. "I conducted the audit personally. These are official documents signed off by companies Martin owns under false names. The paper trail is undeniable." Voices murmured around the table. Some board members looked shocked. Others stared at Martin as though he were a poisonous viper. Alexander's lips curled in disgust. "I trusted you, Martin. We built this company together. Why betray us like this?" Martin's veneer cracked, revealing a sneer. "You built it. We built it, Alexander. And while you paraded around like a savior, I was stuck doing your dirty work. I was tired of living in your shadow." Alexander's voice turned icy. "So you stole from me, from all of us. You gambled with the future of this company, endangering thousands of jobs and the livelihoods of investors, all because of your ego." A ripple of anger spread among the board. Martin glared at them, cornered and defiant. "You're no saint, Alexander. You think you're untouchable. but your empire can collapse just as easily as mine." Alexander clenched his fists, resisting the urge to hurl a retort. Instead, he turned to the board. "I move that we vote immediately to remove Martin Cole from the board and initiate legal proceedings against him." The motion was seconded in a heartbeat. Hands went up around the table, unanimous, except for Martin's lone opposition. Security personnel stepped in at Alexander's nod, ready to escort Martin out. He resisted hurling curses at Alexander. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you go down with me," he shouted as the guards forcibly removed him from the room. A tremor of shock lingered in the aftermath. Alexander exhaled, his stoic mask returning. "We have to move swiftly to contain any fallout. Fiona release a statement to reassure stakeholders that we've taken decisive action. Gentlemen," he addressed the board, "we'll have to work double time to secure the merger and protect our stock value." In the flurry of follow-up discussions, Alexander felt a familiar surge of triumph. He had saved his empire from a traitor. Victory was within grasp. Yet beneath that sense of accomplishment, a pang of something akin to sadness flickered. Martin's betrayal was a painful reminder of why Alexander had built that wall around his heart, why he believed trust was a liability. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, Alexander found himself thinking of Maria. Her words floated back to him. Not everyone is like that. Sometimes the only way to heal is to let someone in. But how could he reconcile that idealistic notion with the ugly truths of his world? In the wake of Martin Cole's expulsion, news spread quickly. Financial media buzzed with headlines about Harrington Holdings rooting out corruption, praising Alexander for his decisive leadership. The company's stock initially wavered, but soon stabilized. The von Richter Motors merger remained on track thanks to Alexander's relentless focus. During this tense period, Alexander received a phone call from Maria. "I heard about what happened in your company," she said. "Are you okay?" He almost scoffed. It was unimaginable that anyone would call just to ask about his emotional state. Yet here she was again, offering empathy without strings. "I'm fine," he replied, his tone guarded. "It's business. These things happen." Maria hesitated. I know you said trust is complicated, but I don't think any of us can do this alone. If you need a friend." He cut in, softened by her genuine concern. "I appreciate that he managed, but I'm all right. Truly." The truth was, he felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Anger at Martin, relief at preserving the company, and a hollowness that he couldn't quite name. When Maria invited him to a community gathering that weekend, a small festival to celebrate the center's recent success in securing partial funding, he found himself saying yes before he could overthink it. He arrived at the festival on a crisp Saturday afternoon, overshadowed by swirling leaves and the promise of early winter. Children ran around with balloons. Local artisans displayed handmade crafts, and a modest band played folksy tunes on a makeshift stage. Maria spotted him from afar, breaking into a radiant smile. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking worlds away from the corporate realm Alexander lived in. He felt strangely overdressed in his tailored slacks and designer coat. Yet the curious glances he received from festival-goers were mostly friendly. "I'm glad you came," Maria said, offering him a hot cup of apple cider from a nearby stall. He took a sip, the spiced warmth a stark contrast to the crisp air. "Nice place," he commented, scanning the festival. Booths offered homemade piss-knitted scarves and local produce. The entire event hummed with a sense of community that Alexander found both foreign and comforting. As they strolled between booths, Maria introduced him to locals. Some recognized him from newspaper articles about the scandal, others remembered him from previous visits to the center. Many simply saw him as Maria's friend, offering a handshake or a smile. He felt a tinge of relief at being welcomed rather than harangued for money or favors. They ended up by a small pavilion where a trio of acoustic musicians played gentle melodies. Maria pulled him in closer to the stage, her eyes alight with happiness. "They're really good," she whispered, swaying slightly to the music. Alexander watched her, captivated by her ease. In his world of cutthroat deals, no one ever allowed themselves to simply enjoy a moment. Yet here she was, living in it, wholeheartedly. He couldn't help but admire her simplicity, a simplicity that came not from ignorance, but from choosing to find grace in life's small pleasures. Without thinking, he reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. She looked up, startled, then blushed. A soft giggle escaped her lips. "Sorry," he said, pulling his hand back as though burned. She placed her hand on his, her gaze steady. "It's okay." Their eyes met, and in that moment the noises of the festival faded. All Alexander could hear was the thrum of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. A swirl of confusion and longing coiled inside him. He wanted to draw her close to let himself be vulnerable. But old habits died hard. He cleared his throat and stepped back, glancing away. "I should probably check on something," he lied. Maria's face fell slightly, but she nodded, respecting the boundary. "I'll be here," she said gently. He moved away from the crowd, leaning against a wooden post as the band continued to play. The sunlight fell in golden streaks, illuminating Maria's figure from a distance. He felt an ache he couldn't name, something that made him yearn for what she represented: genuine kindness, unconditional support, and a life not defined by betrayals and balance sheets. But even as he grappled with these emotions, Alexander's phone buzzed, dragging him back to reality. An urgent text from Fiona indicated that Martin Cole was planning to go to the press with allegations of corruption within Harrington Holdings. It was a move to blackmail Alexander into dropping any legal charges against him. Alexander stared at the message, rage and worry flashing through him. Martin was determined to burn everything down if he couldn't be a part of it. Alexander knew he had to fight back quickly, another corporate battle, to wage another reason to keep his heart barricaded. With a resigned sigh, he glanced one last time at Maria, who was now chatting with some children near a cotton candy stall. He wanted to stay in her world, at least for a moment longer, but duty and survival called him back to his own. The next week was a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and public relations battles. Martin Cole's attempts to smear Harrington Holdings erupted into a media frenzy. He accused Alexander of burying unethical practices and claimed to have proof that Alexander's empire was built on corruption. Most of his evidence was fabricated or twisted, but the press ate it up. Stock prices dipped as panicked investors questioned the stability of the company. Alexander was in crisis mode, orchestrating a counter-offensive with Fiona and his legal team. They compiled years' worth of transparent audits, employee testimonies, and philanthropic records, every shred of evidence to prove Harrington Holdings operated by the book. Nonetheless, the damage to public perception was done. As if sensing his turmoil, Maria called. Despite his initial instinct to ignore personal calls during this chaos, he answered. "I'm fine," he said, not waiting for her to speak first. "I'm worried about you," she said softly. "I saw the news. It looks intense." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting her voice soothe him like a balm on a fresh wound. "It'll pass," he replied, forcing conviction into his tone. "Business storms always do." She paused, then asked, "Would you like some company? A friend to talk to, even if just for a short while?" His chest tightened. He wanted nothing more than to see her, to step away from the madness for an hour, but old defenses flared. I can't," he said abruptly. "I'm sorry." He ended the call. Guilt gnawed at him, but he buried it beneath the pressing task of protecting his empire. Over the next few days, he barely slept. He convened emergency meetings, personally reached out to key stakeholders, and made a series of media appearances to refute Martin's claims. Each interview revealed glimpses of Alexander's legendary ruthlessness, but also a new gravitas that some reporters picked up on, a subtle sense of authenticity that rarely surfaced in men of his wealth. The turning point came when an investigative journalist, who had once benefited from Jennifer Moretti's pro bono legal aid, decided to dig deeper into Martin's allegations. Her findings unraveled Martin's false narratives, linking him to known unscrupulous businessmen who had financed his smear campaign. Within a week, Martin's credibility crumbled. The final blow arrived when the district attorney's office filed formal charges against Martin for embezzlement and fraud. Relief swept over Harrington Holdings. The stock rebounded, the media storm died down, and the von Richter Motors merger was finalized, securing Alexander's legacy for the foreseeable future. His victory was absolute, yet he felt strangely hollow. One evening, as he sat alone in his penthouse, scanning the glittering Manhattan skyline, Alexander realized that all the triumph in the world could not fill the void inside him. He thought of Maria, and how he had abruptly pushed her away when she offered support. He felt a pang of regret and reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over her name in his contact list. Finally he called. She answered after the second ring, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm sorry." He began, surprising himself with the gentle tone. "I've been distant. There was so much going on, and I just—" She didn't scold him. She simply said, "I understand." Alexander swallowed hard. "No, I don't think you do. You've shown me a kind of empathy I'm not used to. And I'm tired of pushing people away." There was a silence that felt like 1,000 heartbeats. Then she spoke, her voice tinged with hopeful caution. "You don't have to, Alexander." The next day, he appeared at the community center unannounced. Maria was seated with a group of children, teaching them basic arithmetic. Their laughter and chatter filled the hallway. She looked up, her eyes widening in pleasant surprise. "Hey," she said, softly, putting down a piece of chalk. He managed a small smile. "Hey." A few of the kids recognized him from earlier visits, waving shyly. "Are you here to help us again?" "Mr. Harrington," one of them asked. Alexander glanced at Maria, then at the children. In that moment, something inside him shifted irrevocably. "Yes," he said, and he meant it on a level deeper than finances. He was here to help, to be present, to not hide behind money or power. He spent the afternoon with them, fielding curious questions about the city, about what it was like to own big companies, about whether he was a real-life superhero. He laughed more in those hours than he had in the past year combined. Maria watched him, a quiet smile on her lips, as if she saw a version of him that had long been buried. When the children left, the two of them lingered in the now empty classroom. The fading sunlight cast a golden glow across the walls. Alexander took Maria's hands in his. His voice was low and earnest. I've been cruel for so long, closed off to everyone, convinced that the only way to survive was to trust no one. But you showed me a different way." She squeezed his hands gently. "You're a good man under all those layers, Alexander. I've always believed that." His eyes stung with tears he refused to shed. Instead, he drew closer, pressing his forehead against hers. "I want to be that man," he murmured. In that small classroom, the cruel billionaire finally let his guard down, finding a refuge in the heart of a simple woman who had taught him that trust wasn't always a weakness, that compassion and vulnerability could be strengths that saved him from his deepest pain. And so the story of Alexander Harrington and Maria Alvarez reminds us that even the hardest hearts can soften when touched by genuine kindness. Behind every towering empire lies a human soul yearning for connection. For Alexander, betrayal had once forged a ruthless shield, but love and compassion carved a path back to the man he once was and the man he aspired to become. If you found yourself moved by this real-life drama fiction, please take a moment to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate stories of redemption and hope. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more tales that celebrate the human spirit. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Your support helps keep these stories alive, reminding us all that change is possible even for the seemingly untouchable.